Welcome to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Here's your host, Grant Bledsoe.
Hello, everybody. Grant Bledsoe here. Welcome back to Grow Money Business. This week's episode is number 79. My guest on the podcast today, drumroll please, Cameron Law. Cameron is the executive director of the Carlsen Center for Entrepreneurship here in Sacramento that works out of Sacramento State University. Cameron is really at the nexus of the local startup community. And the mission of his organization is to foster the development of entrepreneurial activities here locally in Sacramento and elsewhere around the country and the world. So he has a very unique perspective on the startup community here locally, and he has some experience in VCs, venture capital, and other areas as well. So he joins us on the podcast today to talk a little bit about what's going on with the local startup community, because whereas Sacramento has historically been kind of a government-based town, it has a lot of new entrepreneurial activity. Local companies are going public. There are more companies being started, and a lot of it has to do with his and his organization's efforts. This was a great conversation. Stick around till the end. I hope you enjoy it. Hey, everybody. Real quick before we jump into today's episode, I have been advised by my attorneys to remind you all that none of what you might hear in today or any other episode of Grow Money Business is financial, investing, tax, legal, fitness, or even relationship advice. It's content that you're free to use and deploy on your own terms. And before you take any actions on what we might cover in the show, I really encourage you to consult with your accountant, attorney, or financial planner. If you don't have a financial planner and think that you might need one, be sure to check out threeoakswealth.com to learn more about my firm's planning, advice, and investment services. Cameron Law, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Grant, for having me. It's a joy to be here.
Well, I appreciate you coming on today because you have a really interesting background and a really interesting role right now as someone who is helping to develop the young entrepreneurial minds over at Sacramento State. So why don't we start out? Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what you do for a living now?
Awesome. Well, thanks again for having me, Grant. Excited to be here. So I'm from the Sacramento region, born and raised, and I ended up crossing over the causeway and went to UC Davis. But a lot of my time there and growing up was being a baseball player. So I played Division I baseball at Davis, and then upon graduating from Davis with a managerial economics degree and then minored in American history, I moved abroad. So I ended up moving to Brisbane, Australia, where I pursued my master's of business, and I studied social impact and sustainability as well as international business. And for me, it was really just a life-changing opportunity, one just from an educational standpoint, but also kind of figuring out who I was and what I wanted to be outside of someone who could throw a baseball, fairly decently. And so I ended up falling in love with Sacramento. It was always somewhere, I grew up and enjoyed, but to be honest, wanted to get out of there and experience something different. But it wasn't until I moved halfway around the world that I really found a passion and love for Sacramento. I really saw the potential that it held, both from a social lens, but also from an economic lens. And so when I moved back to Sacramento, I was just really passionate about really trying to grow this region and, release all that potential that we do have. And so upon moving back, I joined a local venture capital firm. It's a micro VC called Impact Venture Capital. I worked on a lot of the really community-facing, entrepreneurial-facing programs. We called it kind of corporate and innovation programs. And so that was really where I got hands-on and working with entrepreneurs and just seeing the passion they had for their projects and ideas and really providing them with the capacity and support to grow. And then after a time at Impact, I ended up transitioning to the nonprofit world, where I ended up taking over as the executive director of a small nonprofit called Social Venture Partners of Sacramento. It's a part of an international network where basically philanthropists come together to invest in nonprofits and help them scale, similar to a venture capital approach to philanthropy. And while we were there, we worked with a lot of nonprofits in the Sacramento region, really focused on education and helping students get on a pathway to success and really economic security through their education. And then, for me, a lot of the network that I built through that role and the people that wanted to give back in that kind of philanthropic manner were entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneurs really wanted to get involved in the nonprofits businesses and help them really scale. And that's where I ended up jumping into the Carlsen Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, where I am today. I stepped in as an interim executive director, and now I serve as the permanent executive director going forward. We are located at Sacramento State, so we serve students, faculty, and staff, but we also have a broader mission to make innovation and entrepreneurship pervasive throughout the greater Sacramento region, and really working towards this vision to be a premier hub for innovation and entrepreneurship in the country. And so, as you can tell, it's kind of that alignment that I have of passion for Sacramento and really seeing the role entrepreneurship plays in building a thriving community and region.
So what kind of stuff does the Carlsen Center do? And just to frame that a little bit, the stuff that we do in my financial planning firm, the stuff that I'm interested in personally is just this process of entrepreneur finds maybe an opportunity to do something better and deliver a superior product or service or improve the world in some way, shape, or form. They go out there and they take a huge risk to deliver that to the marketplace. And if they're successful, then it's mutually beneficial to their clients, their customers, but also to themselves economically. And that engine is such an important cornerstone of our society. And it's just something that really fires me up personally. It's been a pleasure to get to know you over the last couple of years, and you really kind of sit at the corner of where all that stuff exists here in Sacramento, which is just really cool. So what does the Carlsen Center do? What is the organization's mission? What's going on right now?
Yeah, so our mission, I'll just kind of reiterate, was to make innovation and entrepreneurship pervasive throughout the greater Sacramento region. And then we have a vision to be the premier hub of regional innovation and entrepreneurship in the country. And at the end of the day, our core purpose is to educate, support, and build the next generation of impact-driven innovators and entrepreneurs. And how we've gone about operationalizing that mission and vision is really through this continuum of support of entrepreneurs. And so how we look at it is through kind of three distinct lenses, which we have our discover, build, and launch types of programs. And so we recognize that in order to foster innovation and entrepreneurship, some people just have to learn about those types of communities that surround innovators and entrepreneurs. And that's kind of what our Discover programs and resources are all about. It's creating what we call those on-ramps into that entrepreneurial journey. So we have a speaker series. So we partner with a local nonprofit called Startup Sac, where we bring in and feature entrepreneurs that have been successful to have that knowledge sharing of things to do and certainly things not to do. So entrepreneurs can have that recycled knowledge so they can be more effective and efficient in their entrepreneurial processes. We host programs called Startup Weekends, where in one weekend you get the opportunity to bring a new idea to fruition, find a team, and surround yourself with mentors of support. And then lastly, we also do college pitch competitions on campus. So give that outlet for students to be creative, explore their ideas, and have that space to say, hey, I think I can create an impact or a change in this space. And then as we move through the process, those that actually have ideas that they want to push forward and be creative with, we have our build programs. And that's where we really focus on saying, as an entrepreneur, we value your idea, but we really want to surround that with a business model, right? And so a lot of entrepreneurs jump in and they're like, I got an idea for a product or a solution. And what we really want the entrepreneurs to do is take a step back and say, what problem are you solving? And that's really the key for an entrepreneur is you're trying to solve a problem and create value for someone else. And the way that you do that is that product and service, but really understanding the problem that you're solving and the value proposition that you're providing the individuals that you're trying to serve is a core component. And so we have a variety of programs that teach entrepreneurs to see their business in that holistic way. One of the things that we bring in is design thinking and really understanding your customer problem from a desirability lens. So what's the desirability around that product and service? What's the feasibility of that technology and service? And then what's the viability, which is really the monetization strategy and understanding if you can you actually make money at it or be sustainable in terms of your revenues versus costs. And so once we've kind of built that foundation of where they have those tools, the mindsets to actually be an entrepreneur and turn their idea into something that's more holistic, we then take them to our launch programs where we have highly customized pathways for them to actually go about bringing on customers and scaling those ventures through capital, right? And so we know, venture capital is certainly an approach to financing. It's not the only way, but we really empower our entrepreneurs to tell their story, whether that be telling it to a customer and understanding how they can create value for them, but also to investors if they need that scale capital to really get going and go about doing that. And so we have two core partnerships in that launch phase. One of them is the Capital Region Small Business Development Center. If you're not familiar with those centers, they're funded by the Small Business Administration, which is a federal program. Create local resources no matter where you are in the nation. And we have a 10-week long program where we help entrepreneurs hone their product statement and really get their idea out into market. And then from a additional partnership, we've partnered with Fourth Way, which is an accelerator for female-led entrepreneurs or female entrepreneurs that lead technology startups. And so we're really excited about those continued partnerships going forward.
Very cool. So you're giving a lot of exposure to students, I suspect, and fostering the next generation, as I think you put it a minute or two ago. But then you're dealing directly with people who are already in business in the local area through those partnerships. So you're kind of hitting all angles of it, I would say. Is that fair? I mean, how do you go around and generate interest for each of those programs?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the things that's unique about the Carlsen Center, in line with the university's anchor initiatives, so really to anchor our resources in the community, we are open not only to just students, faculty, and staff, but really making our programs available to the broader region and community because, it's in line with our mission and vision to grow our entrepreneurial capacity here in Sacramento. So in terms of, bringing on individuals, to be quite honest, the pandemic has, had some forced innovation in taking things online into a Zoom setting. And one of the things that came with that was, pivoting our programs to fully online, which made it much more accessible to entrepreneurs around the region. And so we've really found just a huge appetite, for our programs, one, just in being virtually, but the tools and mindsets that we're able to provide these entrepreneurs really gets them off on the right foot. And at the end of the day, one of the things we always speak to is as an entrepreneur, you can't do it alone. And so we really want to build that community and build those connections so you're more efficient in getting from that point A to point B because we're that community of support to get you there. And so, in terms of marketing, we use, more, the traditional channels of, social media, and we have an e-newsletter where every week we have all the events going on in the Sacramento entrepreneurial ecosystem. We even include things that are not run by the Carlsen Center because we want to make all the resources available to our entrepreneurial community and making sure we're hitting them where they're at in terms of their stage and the support that they need.
Yeah. So you mentioned the changes that you've had to make in your own curriculum and activities, moving to a more Zoom-focused setting. How's the pandemic impacted the level of entrepreneurial activity in general from your perspective? Are you seeing, obviously, struggle creates innovation. You hear that a lot, which I totally believe is true, but it also stifles a lot of projects that are in progress too.
Yeah, so there's been a dramatic increase in entrepreneurship, I believe, locally. Just the attendance of our programs, the applications for our cohort programs, that's dramatically increased. And then there's also from the Kauffman Foundation, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're a national resource based out of Kansas City, and they've done a lot of research. And during the pandemic, there has been an increase in entrepreneurship nationwide. And I think that's, in line with people losing jobs and saying, hey, I need to fend for myself and be able to create opportunity and, a wage for me to survive. And so people are really looking to entrepreneurship as a way to go about doing that. And then, also just things being online and having, potentially more time. I think, certainly things have gotten busy for a lot of people in the virtual world, but having content pretty much everyone delivered right to you in a virtual setting, it just makes being educated and creating those connections all that much easier in terms of understanding that entrepreneurial process. And so I think there's going to be a continued growth in the entrepreneurial space. And, tying it to Sacramento, I think there's a huge opportunity for Sacramento to capitalize on this. We've seen, huge influx of people moving to Sacramento. The housing market certainly has been on the rise, but with that is, where are these individuals moving from? And a lot of them are moving from the Bay Area, right? And so are we able to plug them into our innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem and really help them engage in those startups and hopefully foster that growth from here on out? And so I think there's a ripe opportunity for this region to, continue to grow. And I think, what I do want us to do is own our own culture and not, just totally change who we are, because I do think there's value in who we are as Sacramento area.
For sure, yeah, and that's something that I wanted to ask you about too. So you're a native Sacramento person. I'm relatively new to this area, and I think that the way that a lot of people would characterize Sacramento historically is it's been a politically driven town, being the state capital, but then also a lot of the economic activity has been driven by the utilities too. And so from my perspective as a financial planner, you have a lot of people with pensions, and that kind of flies in the face of entrepreneurial activity when once you stop working, you're guaranteed a check every month for the rest of your life. How would you characterize the entrepreneurial community in Sacramento historically? And then what have you seen maybe in your short experience at the Carlsen Center, but really more so of your career? What changes are you seeing now, both by people moving to the area, but also a little bit more activity in that arena?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And, one of the things people always pointed out was kind of being a government town, right? That was certainly something that was always pointed out about Sacramento. And I think there's actually a value proposition within that, right? And so being kind of entrepreneurial minded as well, like what's the value of having all these government entities and having the state capital here as well? Those are great consumers of technology and things like that, right? And so flipping that script is how do we actually create government technologies or government services around that to where we're actually building that entrepreneurial base. And so I think with that is just a mindset shift. And I believe the entrepreneurial mindset is certainly coming around in those components where, I think this last year and a half has been something that was, I would call forced innovation, right? Where as government entities had to, they had to be forced online, right? And they had to look for new solutions and things like that. And so where we're uniquely situated as a region is to be those providers for those types of things, right? And quite honestly, probably one of the stickiest customers out there if you can ultimately land a state contract, right? And so that's certainly something that's valuable. In terms of growing up in this region, I think one of the things you would see is the entrepreneurs tended to be, I would say, I don't know if it's the right term, but more in the kind of conservative world of it, right? They were in real estate, insurance, those types of things, right? Like that was like the where I feel like our entrepreneurs really lived. And, that certainly has built the physical world that we live in Sacramento. But what I've seen really kick off is that, we're getting more software technologies and that more kind of, I would say scalable startups happening in the Sacramento region. And where you have is a lot of those investors that were investing in real estate, hopefully now starting to transfer those investments to that startup community, right? And so starting to actually invest in that base. So I think we'll continue to see that. Our proximity to, the Bay Area and accessing that capital, I think that corridor is becoming closer and closer, although it takes longer and longer to get to the Bay Area actually physically. I think the capital is getting closer and closer in terms of connections. So I think we're on the precipice of something big in the Sacramento area. I think with the launch of the California Mobility Center, there'll be a huge uptick in mobility technologies. That's everything from hardware products to actually building cars, but to also, the IoT and the autonomous components that actually drive, autonomous vehicles and those types of things, right? And so I think we have, and also with Aggie Square, a lot of health tech innovations and things like that could be taking place. And so I think it's really flipping the mindset to say government and the healthcare that's in our backyard is not a liability, but it's actually an asset that we could utilize and be able to actually have as customers. And part of that is, they need to take more risks on small businesses and startups as providers, right? And so hopefully, from our mindset is, in working with students and hopefully the future leaders of, these institutions and these companies, is if we can ingrain that entrepreneurial mindset of creating value for one another, that we can ultimately kind of change that paradigm for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. And the Aggie Square that you referenced, and we've got listeners from all over the place. That's the organization at UC Davis, right down the road from us here in Sacramento, that focuses on. Well, you can describe it better than me, but it's affiliated with UC Davis, right?
Yeah, so it's an innovation district that UC Davis is building in Sacramento for the city of Sacramento. So it's an extension campus, but we'll be really focused on health tech and life science innovations. And so, with that, you're building a district that comes with jobs, it comes with new innovations and startups, right? And so it's really that kind of connectivity to foster that, and recognizing we have a lot of healthcare representation in this area, that we ultimately can be able to hopefully get those contracts for these startups to where they're actually growing, and then they can scale nationwide, and you actually have some of those larger success stories here locally.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you made a really good point too about the government town actually being having a lot of opportunity as opposed to being a liability. And we've seen in the last year here a couple of examples of local companies going public they're having a lot of success. So a little bit later down the development path than the companies that you're probably working with directly, but PowerSchool is one that provides software to school districts around the country that just went public or is about to through a SPAC, I believe, and there are probably 2 or 3 others in that same vein, right? And so we're starting to see those transactions happen, I think, with more frequency. And at the end of the day, I mean, whether it's in the startup community or elsewhere, I've always felt like Sacramento is close enough to the Bay Area and close enough to the mountains to where both are accessible, for a day's visit. And just the geographic position it makes it a really attractive place to live. It's just pretty warm in the summers for a couple of months, but man, it's a great spot to live and raise a family.
Certainly. No, I totally agree. The accessibility to, a bigger city in San Francisco and the broader Bay Area, and then also just, probably, one of the nicest mountain ranges in terms of Tahoe, and the skiing up there is certainly great. And, for me, I love the Sacramento River as well. It's always fun to go down there and enjoy, that accessibility that provides as well. So, I think that's one of the things we've always mentioned as a selling point to Sacramento. And I really think now it's not just that we're the stop between 2 cities, but that living here creates that accessibility, and that there's a lot to do in the thriving Sacramento region. There's been a huge growth, in terms of entrepreneurship, a ton of new restaurants coming in, craft breweries and things like that are really growing this region, and really building out the culture of the Sacramento region for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So summarizing this in a timeline kind of way, we've got Sacramento being historically a really government-focused town. Now we're getting a little bit more entrepreneurial activity in your local scene, from restaurants and breweries, and certainly wine's been around for a long time. Historically, the entrepreneurial activities were more focused on like real estate, financial services, that kind of stuff. And now more and more people are moving to the area. There are more connections with Bay Area entrepreneurs, the business community, certainly capital, and so forth. And so we're just kind of it seems to me like we're just kind of at the precipice of a larger movement in that direction, now that the pandemic has made people realize they can work from anywhere, and we have a lot of immigration from other places in the state and outside of the state to the region. What happens next? What are the opportunities? How does that impact our day-to-day lives as citizens of Sacramento? What happens?
So I think when I visualize it, I see it as like a pulse to the city. Obviously, right now it's hard to say what the feeling is, because we've been sheltered in place to some degree or remote, and you can't really feel the like city taking off. But before this all happened, you have just a tremendous movement with the downtown Commons, which is a new development downtown with the Sacramento Kings Arena, which is I think it's still the most high tech NBA arena in the nation, and so you just have a lot of this culture building around innovation, technology, and there's kind of I just envision it as this energy in the urban core, and that spreads out into the broader region as well. And so, for me as a citizen, I think you'll start to kind of see that growth. With that comes jobs. It comes, continued development of new restaurants and new communities. I think there's certainly a sprawl to Sacramento, and you're seeing hubs of innovation coming up in Roseville and Lincoln, which is more up the hill in those types of components. But I think for me, when I look at Sacramento's opportunity areas, as I mentioned, I think an under leveraged asset is certainly the government and using that as an asset and as a customer. But I think areas that we'll see continued growth is around the mobility space and technologies around those components. Certainly health technologies through Aggie Square and the life sciences with that. But I think also what's not always talked about is ag technology is huge in this area. And all the amount of farming that goes on locally, right? I think we transformed our city's name to the City of Trees to the Farm to Fork capital. But with that is also the technologies that will help these farmers really be more efficient and effective. There was a recent company that went through the Kings Capitalize competition. So the Kings host the Sacramento Kings, our NBA team, they host a pitch competition for local startups called the Kings Capitalize program. And one of the teams was called FloraPulse, which is a sensor for being more efficient with your wine production. So it actually monitors the amount of water that the certain vines are getting. And so creates more efficiency, but it also produces the best wine because you can see the amount of water that's going into the grapes. And so, those are the future innovations that I think that will be coming out of the Sacramento region. One from a, economic lens, that's new jobs, that's more capital here, but also hopefully better wine for our region as well. So, which will be fun.
I'm all for that.
Yeah,
that sounds
there
pretty
you
good
go.
to me.
It's a double win for sure.
So now that you've been working as the executive director at the Carlsen Center for a couple of years, what's the hardest part of that position at this point?
The toughest part. I think the toughest part for me has been I've historically worked in really small teams. So I ran a nonprofit by myself as the sole executive director and worked with the board. When I was at Impact Venture Capital, was a small team there, and so now being a part of feasibly a whole city in terms of a university has been one that there's more processes and procedures, and rightly so because it's just a huge institution. But for me, that kind of combination of trying to move fast, but also move in the right way and representing the university in the correct manner has been, a good challenge and one that's been learning for me in a lot of ways. But, for me, there's a lot of value in being at the university, and especially Sac State. There's been a huge growth from the university. It's really changed its paradigm. Instead of just being that kind of transient college, it's one that's actually being an established college and anchoring in the community. And one statistic that I wanted to point out and why I think the Carlsen Center is so powerful in being located at the university is 65% of students that graduate from Sac State stay, live, and work in the region. And so for me, is if those students start having touch points with the Carlsen Center, getting to understand innovation and that entrepreneurial mindset, whether they go start their businesses or not, they'll have a better appreciation for that person that is taking a risk to start a business, right? And all the processes that go for that. And so, say they are working for the state and they're in procurement, they understand what that entrepreneur is trying to do and the risks that they've taken. And so for me, there's that empathy that they can provide in going through that entrepreneurial process. And I think that culture will transform our region, and one where we really value in trying to create value for one another and have that kind of empathy for our entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Once you're exposed to the process, definitely gives you a different appreciation for it. Yeah. Are you so now that you're touching a bunch of different businesses, a bunch of different entrepreneurs at various stages in their life cycle, are you seeing any consistent or common like mistakes that entrepreneurs are making these days?
Great question. The one that comes to mind, especially because I would say if we were to look at more venture capital style, we're kind of at that idea to about seed stage. So that's kind of where we go. And then the ecosystem, we have a lot of partners that we would have them go with. But the problem I kind of mentioned earlier was a lot of entrepreneurs start with the widget or thing in mind, and they go hunting for the problem that solves. And one of the things we really want to educate entrepreneurs is the key is understanding who's your customer and what problem do they have, because the solution may take different forms. But if you come with this rigid solution to say, hey, does this solve your problem? They might say yes, but are they actually willing to pay for that is a different thing versus saying, hey, Grant, this sounds like this is your problem. You're my ideal kind of early adopter or my customer. Would this form of a solution really help you? Is like, yes, but actually if you had these things, that would be more valuable to me in terms of solving that problem, right? And so it allows you to be more effective in getting some sort of prototype or MVP into the marketplace and then iterating with your potential customers versus going with the build it and they will come approach, and where you put thousands of dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars in building a product, and then it was like, oh, it flopped in the market. Well, it's because you didn't understand who your customer was and what problem you were actually solving. And so that's really where we work with our entrepreneurs to say, hey, if you built something, there's nothing wrong with that, but let's take a step back and say, what problem are you solving and for who, and then how are you creating value through this potential solution, whether that's a product or service.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And when you're in that mindset, you've got this great idea and you have all these bells and whistles that you want to add to your product or service in the specific way that you've built up in your mind that you want to put it together. And so you work on it. Oh, it's not ready. It's, and you keep building this thing out and then bring it to market. And it's a hard thing to do is to bring it out there and to get direct feedback from your potential customer base before you feel it's ready, because you've built up all those bells and whistles inside your own head. And that's just a classic trap that I think a lot of businesses fall into. Just get something out there in its basic form and let other people tell you what they want and then build from there, because it's highly inefficient and dangerous to do it the other way around.
Exactly. And, one of the things that we teach, and it's kind of, may sound very curriculum based, but was like, when you think of your early adopter, right? The early adopter doesn't necessarily need all the bells and whistles, because if you think through that problem lens, their problem's so acute and like they need some sort of solution to solve it, right? And so they're like, I don't need version 10, I need just version 1, and then we'll work together, because the like later consumers, right, more the mainstream market, they're the ones that need all those bells and whistles, but that's not your first customer, right? And so
Right.
That's where you can then grow with your customer base. But then you're not like building it and then there's like a flop because the technology no one understood, or they weren't even aware they had that problem, right? And so your early adopters, aware they have the problem, they're actively looking for a solution, and they already probably align some sort of budget to buy something, even though it might not be the best thing out in the world. It's better than any solution that currently exists in the market.
Right. And every version that you proceed without collecting that important feedback deviates a little bit from what people actually end up wanting when it's all said and done. You just get farther and farther and farther down a dangerous path. I have a little bit, so my entrepreneurial experience is starting the financial planning firm, and it's not really that entrepreneurial because it's not like it's a new product or service that's never been delivered before. A lot of people need help making good financial decisions, retiring, marrying their personal finances with what's going on at their business, managing money, all that stuff that financial advisors typically do. But some of the best advice that I got when starting was, okay, I think I have an idea of how I want to build this shop, who I want to work with, what the process is going to look like. Somebody in the industry said that, well, you ought to just find 10 people like who you think you want to work with and just go out and buy them lunch one day and just describe what you're doing or thinking about doing and get their feedback on it before you even file the paperwork, because they'll tell you whether you're on the right track or not. But if you are on the right track, it's likely that because financial advice is not very niche yet, it's often mass produced and generalized. It's often that you'll say the right words and pick up a couple of your first clients by doing that. And it's kind of a watered down version of what you're describing, but man, it was
No,
exceptionally
totally.
helpful.
Well, yeah, no, and I think I remember having early conversations with you, and certainly I think what I looking back in those conversations was you're really trying to define who that core customer segment you were, right? Like the whole plethora of financial services, there's a lot of them out there, right? But it was like, I want to serve this particular type of person, and I've recognized that they have unique problems in terms of maybe they are entrepreneurial, and there's different ways you have to save as an entrepreneur than there is if you have a state job or something of that sort, right? And so that kind of understanding of, hey, there's existing solutions out there, but you found another way to create value for another individual. And so I would say that certainly is an entrepreneurial process. Maybe there was not a technology component to it, which isn't necessarily entrepreneurship or innovation necessarily. One of the things that we really talk about is value innovation, right? So how are you creating value in a different way? And that's where the innovation sometimes lies. It's not necessarily that, hey, the innovation is the technology. It's like, no, the technology unlocked a new way to deliver value to a new customer base.
Yeah, that's fair. I think of it as not quite as entrepreneurial, because if you head down this path and start like a financial planning firm like I've done, your success rate is high if you can just eke out the first couple of years. You don't have to spend a whole bunch of money and produce some new good or service. You can be done on a budget. The question is, can you grow by enough in the first few years to pay your living expenses before you run out of money? And if you compare that with, I forget the name of it, but the wine tool that measures the water going into the vines, you've got to spend a bunch of money to create a product that measures that accurately, and you might not be able to do that successfully. The failure rate in a venture like that is much higher, I think.
Certainly. No,
it's just
I
different worlds.
certainly understand the premise, but yeah, I think for me, as anyone taking that leap to create new value in a different way, is certainly being entrepreneurial. One of the things I went through a recent training, and they talked about entrepreneurship through a different lens, in that entrepreneurship is a self-directed pursuit to create value for others, and by creating value for others, you empower yourself, right? And so for me, what we try and teach a lot of our students is, and I'd love to share this with the community as well, is you can be entrepreneurial. You don't have to necessarily start a business to be entrepreneurial, right? And it's about creating that value for others and having that mindset to say, hey, Grant, I see you have a problem. I have a unique skill set or view of the world that can create value for you. Let me solve that problem for you and be entrepreneurial with you and create that value. And so I think hopefully we can empower more people to be entrepreneurial, because that will foster more entrepreneurship in terms of actually business creation.
I totally agree. Totally agree. I've always felt like it's your best opportunity to make an impact on the world in the way that you want, because it's, you're marrying the opportunity for personal enrichment and economic enrichment, of course, but by truly adding value to some other community or organization or person, it's just a very cool thing.
Exactly.
I would be remiss, Cameron, if I didn't get your take on cryptocurrencies and how many of your businesses are involved in or related to blockchain technology.
It's a good question. And from a student lens, I have not seen a ton of blockchain technologies and cryptocurrencies. We've certainly seen some in the ecosystem, and there's a kind of a fintech consortium that's coming together in the Sacramento region to really look at that whole sector, and I would include cryptocurrency certainly in the fintech space. I think for me, when I look at cryptocurrencies and the whole blockchain conversation, is looking at the business model behind the actual currency, right? So a lot of people look at it from a currency lens as like, ooh, it's at $1. I'm going to speculate that it's going to go up. But it's like at the end of the day, those are businesses that are trying to create some sort of solution, right? And so how are they actually, what's the application of those blockchain types of companies that are creating those currencies behind it, right? And so for me, that's where the conversation needs to go. And I think that will come with a more sophisticated approach to that marketplace. I don't know that we're really approaching it from that lens. It's much more speculative for sure. But I think, we saw with recent comments from Elon Musk around kind of the sustainability factor of it. Well, that's a business model thing. Like, are you choosing to use clean energy and an infrastructure that uses less energy in the way that you're mining these ledgers and those types of things, right? And so that's a business model decision versus saying, I'm just going to use, dirty energy or whatever to power this. And that will actually help drive that conversation forward. So I think for me, I was just talking to my brother and one of his best friends the other day about it was, with that progress, there's going to be new applications that are needed, right? How do we go sit down to dinner? Say we move to complete cryptocurrencies. How do we pay? There's going to need to be new solutions that are created for us to transact those currencies that maybe we hold in our virtual wallets, right? How does a Starbucks say, I'm going to take this coin or this coin, right? How does that actually take place in an efficient way, and one that you don't have a huge winner or loser, but one that's an actual married transaction? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity, but I don't necessarily know a ton about blockchain for sure. But I do think if I was to make any advice, was like taking it to a similar approach as you would invest in a company in the stock market or something. And obviously I'm not like a financial advisor by any means, but approaching it from a business lens and looking at them from that component of things.
Yeah. It's my thinking on this is evolving. I'm certainly no expert either, but just that concept of the general ledger where there's a centralized ecosystem that removes an intermediary on both sides of the transaction. So if you wanted to send money to me right now, we could PayPal each other, Venmo, you could write a check, go to the ATM, get cash, right? But your bank account is the intermediary in every single one of those transactions. And that's a really inefficient and expensive way to transact in the aggregate in our community. And so having some generalized, which is what the blockchain really is, and I don't know, how many coins will eventually, dictate that ecosystem, whether there's a need for more coins, whether we have everywhere, whether there's only one, if you're a Bitcoin maximalist, as they say. And you're right. The conversation is around, holy smokes, I should have bought Bitcoin at 15,000 when I was looking at it last year. Now it's at 60. I'm feeling stupid. That's not the right way to look at it. It's to look at the way that it's set up and the potential applications in the world here in the future, because that kind of concept is undoubtedly a more efficient way to transact. And I don't think it's going to displace the Bitcoin is going to displace the US dollar or any of that stuff. And the taxing authorities are going to have their say, and governments will at some point probably become punitive if it grows beyond a certain point. But that concept is very, very sound. So it's interesting that you're seeing a little bit of it, but not that much in the student community. I would have suspected that the younger generations are really on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm seeing is a lot of conversations around more the like crypto market than creating solutions or creating another application to blockchain or those types of things. I think it's gone certainly in its fits and spurts in terms of the market. The ICO, so the initial coin offerings, I think had a huge negative impact to the crypto market and kind of the legitimacy of it. And for me, at the end of the day, what is a currency, right? It's an agreed upon valued set for some way to transact goods, right? And so I think for me, where that market needs to get is, you can't have a currency that in one day goes from, this representation and loses 20% of its value. You're like, my net worth just dropped by, if it was all your money was in Bitcoin, right? In one day, you would lose 20% of your net worth. And like, that's not good for any transaction. And so that, for me, says there's not totally that trust of this is a valued currency that we can use in an applied manner. And so I think that's where that application and thinking differently about what currencies actually represent will be a key to unlock that marketplace.
Yeah, we're certainly a long way off from that. From my perspective, the logistics are just too. If we're going to start using it in everyday life, if I bought $1 worth of Bitcoin today, and then that the value doubled, and now I have $2 worth of Bitcoin in my wallet, and then I went to Starbucks and bought a $2 cup of coffee, now I'm supposed to report a $1 capital gain on that. And how on earth am I going to do that? I mean, I guess your Coinbase, CoinDesk type of operators responsible for the digital wallet, maybe tracking it on my behalf, but that just creates a logistical nightmare. And there are a lot of there's a lot of room between where we are now and it being widely accepted as a legitimate currency.
Yeah, no, it's certainly an interesting space, and I think it'd be interesting to see if there's more students coming up with that in the next few years. But yeah, we haven't seen a ton, at least in my space, more so from some of the community organizations that are trying to create different developer apps or things like that will unlock certain things in that area.
For sure. I have to ask about your attire today, Cameron, because you've got purple glasses on and a purple shirt on. And I mean, I've not seen you in a while, but do you always match like that? You've always been a sharply dressed dude, but not to this degree.
I thought I typically always had a suit on. I've definitely down dressed in the virtual world. So I went with the nice purple polo. Sometimes I'll wear some other colorful ones, and I always get made fun of by the students, which is always in good heartedness. But they're hey, you got your bowling shirt on, or things like that. So I always come with fun around that space. But yeah, I try and coordinate as much as I can, for sure.
Well, if there are any students listening to this, that's rightly so. You got to get your jabs in where you can.
Yes, of course. And on occasion I'll wear the Hawaiian shirts just to inspire them on a Friday when we're meeting and things like that. But
I also want to talk about baseball for a minute, because your college baseball career was a little bit similar to mine in that I wasn't very good and didn't play very much. Not to insinuate that you weren't very good.
I wasn't very good.
Division one school. But baseball, are you a Giants fan? Who is your team?
I'm a Giants fan. I have to say I haven't followed it as much. So if there is certain things this year I haven't been following as much as I usually would. But
well, we were both pitchers in our playing days way back when, and when I played a long time ago, the game kind of self-policed itself, and if somebody flips their bat or does something that that your team doesn't like, the expectation was that as a team player, you're going to hit that guy in between the ribs or throw behind him. But the beanball was always this mechanism of self-policing in the game. And it's changing just in an astronomical way over the last couple of years, and people are going crazy with the celebrations. I'm a Mariners fan. I like the Giants because I live here and as my National League team, but I grew up in Alaska, and so we got Mariners games. I'm a big Mariners fan. So they're playing the Padres like last week, and Fernando Tatis Jr., who is an incredible young player. I think he hits 2 home runs in the game, 6 RBIs. One of his home runs was a grand slam. And so he tosses his bat like 15 feet in the air. And as he's rounding third base, he like stops, backs up, does a little dance, and continues down the base paths. If that were me as a mental midget, as my teammates would probably say, and somebody who gets angered easily when I was playing, I would have been through the roof, and I would have absolutely wanted to plunk him the next time he came up. But that's not a thing anymore. People are accepting of that. It's just totally changing. And as somebody who's had a somewhat similar career to myself, I was just curious what your thoughts on all this were, because it's probably good for the game and that you're, giving the players a little bit more latitude to have fun. It's attracting younger fans. Those are all good things. And maybe I'm an old curmudgeon. I'm only 37, but I'm feel like an old school guy here. In that it would make me really angry, and it's
Yeah,
just a new way it's played.
yeah. No, it's a great question. I hadn't really given that much thought, but in terms of, I would be certainly frustrated. I think for me, where the beanball really came in, celebration is one thing. There's a line that I think is drawn, and maybe that line's now further out than it certainly used to be. But for me, it was when there was like foul play, like where someone played and actually could potentially injure someone, right? So like sliding with the cleat up, or doing something that's dirty in terms of like actually physically hurting someone. That's one where, for me, I would certainly draw the line. In terms of celebration, I probably, back in the day, that would be something that would frustrate me. Now, my frustration was probably playing baseball, and for me, I was more worried about trying to throw strikes or things like that. So if I got it over the plate and you hit it over, whatever at that point. But no, it's a good thing. I do think it's probably good for the game in terms of adding some more flavor to it. I think right now is certainly an interesting year where there's like no one in the stand, so it's not like people would like, woo, look at the crazy celebration that he's doing. But no, I think it's an interesting thing to certainly look at. I wouldn't want to make the game any slower. So if it's certainly taking a lot more time to get around the bases, then that might be something for sure. But no, it's a good thing. More so probably if there was like someone who owned me. There's someone who's owned me since Little League, and I played him in college. He hit a home run off of me then again, and so if there's someone like that, then there might be, a little more animosity. But no.
Yeah, you make a good point. It's a line of scrimmage, and what's clearly over the line, if there's physical harm being done, then you have to protect your team and your teammates. And to be totally clear to everybody listening, when I use the word beanball, I'm not talking about throwing at somebody's head. That is never okay. I'm talking about some throwing between their hip and their shoulders, and intentionally hitting them with the baseball. And it's not allowed by Major League Baseball anymore. You get fined, you get suspended. I'm sure that pitchers still do it from time to time, but it's just an interesting evolution to the game. But like I say, I'm an old curmudgeon, and I also gave up a lot of home runs. I was not very good. So perhaps my anger level there, somebody was showing me up. I mean, I didn't have a whole lot of successes to balance that out, which probably made me a little hotter than I should have done.
I was probably more likely to just peg you because I threw it inside and hit you than I actually was like throwing at you. So there might be some missed, and I mean, that's the thing too, right? Is sometimes there's missed signals, whereas like first pitch is like the guy gets drilled and people think you're like throwing at them, but it was really you're trying to get in on their hands or something of that sort. So totally. I think there has to be an understanding on certainly both sides of that. Maybe we can get more celebrations from pitchers when they strike people out or something. We do some sort of I don't know. That certainly wouldn't be my mentality. I was always like, give me the rock and get the next guy up there. So
yeah, same here. But if I'm going to give up a home run anyway, I might as well stop him at first base by putting him on.
Yes, exactly. No, that's fair. It's a strategic play as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I like it.
All right. Well, back to entrepreneurial stuff. What have we missed, my friend? What are you working on right now? You got any new projects? Anything else you want to promote?
I think the only thing maybe, and it wasn't missed, it was more so just a natural part of the conversation is, for me, I think to truly grow entrepreneurship wherever you're listening from, I think this is certainly something that we need to focus on as a nation. It's not something just from a Sacramento lens that we need more entrepreneurship, but it's actually something that the Kauffman Foundation has a lot of research on, but we're at like all-time lows of startup density. So it's actually new business creations per capita. So as a nation, we have the lowest percent of entrepreneurship as we've really ever had. And so really getting involved in your communities, whether you're starting a business or you're supporting entrepreneurs, there's a ton of ways to get there and support them. That could be attending programs. So every Wednesday, there's a program that I co-organize called 1 Million Cups, where 2 entrepreneurs come and present their company, get 20 minutes of feedback and connections to help them be successful. And there's 160 communities around the nation that run that program. And so there's just small ways like that you can get involved in your entrepreneurial community, because entrepreneurs can't do it alone. They need your accounting support. They need your marketing support. They need you as customers. They need your connections to capital. And so recognizing that the ecosystem that surrounds an entrepreneurship is not just entrepreneurs, it's all of us. And we have to be that backbone for that whole ecosystem and really support that community and thriving.
Very well put. Well, I appreciate you coming on and telling us what's going on at the Carlsen Center. Like I say, this is a really cool organization, and I'm happy to have gotten to know you over the last couple of years, Cameron. You're no doubt an asset to the community here, and I'm really looking forward to where you take this thing next. So thanks for coming on. Any parting words?
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Grant. Always a pleasure to connect with you, and look forward to connecting in person sometime here soon. And keep up the great work, and appreciate the opportunity to share about the Carlsen Center. We are a resource, and we'd love for you to reach out and connect. Even if you're not in the community or in the Sacramento area, check out our website. We have a ton of recordings on there for entrepreneurs that have shared their story, as well as just workshops that have been recorded. So check out those resources and get on your way to supporting entrepreneurs or being an entrepreneur. So thank you.
Right on. Thanks, Cameron.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you digest podcasts to ensure you don't miss out on future episodes and announcements. And feel free to submit questions to growmoneybusiness.com.